It's Peter Mead, and welcome to the Australian Search Marketing Academy. This is the first episode, and today we've got some interesting topics. We're going to be talking about speeding up WordPress, and we've got some brilliant guests, Jono Alderson and Nik Ranger. And welcome everybody to the webinar in Australia, UK, USA. I know we've got a lot of people coming from lots of different places. And so it's a new format. We decided to revamp things. We really want to get as much information for people to get it out there to help people to really figure out what's going on with the speed of your WordPress. How can we fix it up? So firstly, let me introduce Jono Alderson, who's the Special Ops at Yoast. And Jono, how are you today? What's happening?
I'm really good, thanks. I'm cooped up in a pretty appalling hotel room after speaking at an event this afternoon with some pretty bad lighting and a not great laptop camera. But I'm fueled up on coffee. It's 11 p.m. and we're going to blitz through this. It's going to be super fast, and we'll see who survives at the end.
Love it. Love that. That snappy, cohesive. Awesome. Let's go through the tutorials. Nik, how are you? What's happening? Nik Ranger, SEO extraordinaire, based in Melbourne. What's happening?
Hello, we're coming to you live from Melbourne. We're very excited to be here. It is currently 10 o'clock in the morning, and so I'm just getting started for my day. So, sorry, Jono, but I'm pretty fresh.
Coffee? Everyone's had coffee? Nice. Well, today we've had so much, I guess people asking questions about how to speed up WordPress. Why is it running slow? I guess one of the first things as we're starting to get into SEO and we're starting to get better search results and do better in Google and in Bing, we really start discovering that the speed is such an important, ranking factor, if you want to use those words. Of course, I'm a bit divergent to those words because I think it's not really about rankings, is it?
What do you mean? Like SEO's game the system? I mean, I'm sorry. What?
No.
Great content and user experience. Yeah. No, I'm going to cover that in some of the content that I think. Skipping ahead, I think speed is all about user experience, right? And user experience is a ranking factor in whatever terminology we like.
So I'm really interested in this tutorial you've got for us, Jono. Would you like to get started?
Sure, I can do the honors. I guess one thing, or a few things before I jump in. One is I'm conscious that I can't see a timer when I'm presenting this on my rather boxy setup. So if I approach some kind of unreasonable amount of minutes, feel free to just jump in and shoot me down. We'll manage that. The other thought was, I guess WordPress has a reputation in some places for being slow, in the same way that it has a reputation for being insecure or a bit of a toy. I think hopefully I can shoot some of those down. I think one of the biggest challenges that WordPress in particular has is that it's incredibly accessible and there's a very, very low barrier to entry, which means a lot of people expect it to be perfect out of the box and then go on and do either ill-conceived or outright stupid things with it. I think there's no reason why a WordPress site can't be lightning fast, can't be completely secure, can't be 100% optimized. It just requires some thought and some work in the same way it would with any other platform or any other system. You just need to understand the rules and to follow those. I come on to it in a bit. Yoast.com loads in under half a second in some scenarios. My site JonoAlderson.com loads in like 0.7 seconds or something. Yeah, it's all very achievable. You just need to know the rules. So let's do the thing. Let me try and share a screen.
I think just for the listeners out there, when we're talking about seconds and, why are we here? Why are we doing this at all? Why is this something that's very important? Of course, Google said in 2016 that this is something that they're really focusing on as far as user experience. As we've all just said, it's user experience can be considered in whatever thought you want to be a ranking factor. But of course, as someone is on the tools, if you can get a site from, say, like 7 seconds down to like 2 seconds, you can see a massive, massive improvement in, the things that matter to you in conversions.
That's kind of like double your revenue difference.
Plus, plus I love surfing on fast sites.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing as pleasant than instantly loading pages there.
Yeah, we all expect everything to happen pretty quickly.
Oh, yes. Can everyone see my screen? Have I shared that successfully?
Yeah. We
Yes.
can see
Oh,
it.
wonderful.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, do keep an eye on my timings for me, everybody. Shout at me, shout at the guys. Leave feedback in the comments if you get bored or distracted. Let's see how we go. I have no idea how long this is, so by all means, rein me in. So, as we've just touched on, let's start with some context. This is a stat from 2016 from Google. Obviously, the world has moved on since then, and our expectations have risen. But even in as far back as 2016, delays of over 3 seconds mean that you might lose over half of your traffic. And that's before your analytics tags fire. It's before you get a chance to really show them and talk them through your proposition and messaging. That's loss that you're not even aware is happening. And most websites take well over 3 seconds to load. Even today, even with modern technology and WordPress, etc., you're losing huge amounts of potential market without even knowing it. That's scary. So I juggled these slides earlier and they've all gone out of order. That's fun. So I'm going to skip through some of that. We'll revisit that later, despite it being in completely wrong order. More stats. This is Wired Magazine in 2014. Half of your visitors expect your site to load in less than 2 seconds. That's 5 years ago. Technology has moved on, expectations have risen, mobile networks have got faster, desktop browsing's got faster, new JavaScript frameworks are a thing, new CSS techniques are supported by browsers. This is old. Those expectations are going to be twice as high now. So half of your audience is annoyed or leaving in 2 seconds. Think about that. Not even that, but even the audiences who get past that first step, as far back as 2014, 1 in 5 of them would abandon their transactions if the cart and checkout process was too slow. They've got through your slow, clunky website. Yeah, you do, don't you? Like, click add to cart, or I put the wrong one, change the number, it takes 5 seconds to refresh, I'm frustrated, I'm abandoning. Go find it and buy it on Amazon or somewhere else. So this stuff is real. Like, even aside from SEO and WordPress, ignore all of that. That's just content, just detail. The point is every millisecond counts for extra visitors, lost conversions, etc., etc. The simple version of that is that without any doubt whatsoever, spending more time doing stuff is less money, and therefore spending less time doing stuff is more money. Nik, you were just mentioning, like, 2016, Google shipped a load of stuff. This is their updated stuff from their documentation from 2018, saying, and it's not rocket science, people expect to be able to find their answers as quickly as possible. And that studies of real human beings who aren't experts in digital marketing, who don't know SEO, who are just using the things, actually really care about speed. And there's a whole bunch of other research around the levels of stress it causes when things are slow, and it's akin to watching a horror movie. People really don't like it. They do say, on the other hand, however, really frustratingly, that what they're calling the speed update only affects really slow, really bad pages, which was essentially a permission for a whole bunch of people not to think about improving speed of their site. However, when you dig further into that documentation, they say this, which I think is wonderful. They encourage developers to think broadly about how performance affects a user's experience of the page and consider a whole variety of metrics. What they're saying is that experience is an enormously important ranking factor, and you can debate this till the cows come home. You can debate what user experience is, you can debate what the words ranking factors mean, but on the simple level of the service, how good your website is and how pleasant it is to use will both directly and indirectly affect how highly you rank in search results in whatever flavor. And how quick your site is a huge component of that overall user experience. So even if speed isn't a direct ranking factor, when in a literal sense, it definitely is part of user experience, which definitely is hugely impactful. So this stuff is real. It's really important. Google are prioritizing it for a whole bunch of reasons. It's worth noting, and this is slightly tinfoil hat moment, that whilst fast websites are better for users because they're a better experience, fast users are a better experience for Google because they're more efficient. And when we look at how Google consumes and crawls content in the web, every kilobyte they have to download, every second they have to wait is direct expenditure. That's cost to them for running data centers, for cooling servers, for storing data, for managing processing. So a faster web, you're downloading fewer kilobytes because you've optimized your resources. You're not downloading things you don't need. You're detecting the device. This is an efficiency play. Like, Google want a faster web because it's better for users, but also because it's better for them. So it just makes absolute sense to really be focusing on this. Even if I is already relatively fast, you can probably still set more value and performance by speeding up. Okay, so that's set the scene. I'll skip some of this because I'll just go through. And there are links to all of this. I'm sure we'll send the slides over afterwards, but there's things like this is Google's revenue calculation tool. You tell how your site is, it tells you how much money you can make, etc., etc. So we have a challenge. How do we measure speed? What do we mean? There are two things you need to understand in my out of order slides. The first is that there is no such thing as speed, which makes things slightly difficult even. So you could say something very simple, for example, like say, okay, speed is how long it takes for a page to finish loading. But what happens if that page has things which only load after the user scrolls, or they have things which are adverts that load after 5 seconds have gone by, or even more complex, let's say the server responds really quickly, but then it takes ages to display the page, or the server takes quite a long time to respond, but then all the display stuff happens instantly. Which one of those is faster? What is it faster? Is it slow? These words are too simplistic. We need to have a better understanding. So we need to explore what we mean by speed. In order to do this, there are a bunch of really handy tools off the shelf, which I'm going to rip apart now and explain why you shouldn't use and why you should ignore and burn with fire. This is Pingdom. Really nice. All of the numbers are nonsense. So it gives you a performance grade, which is just taken from another tool, which I'll come into in a minute, Google's page speed. So you can ignore that. It gives you a time that's specific to the URL you've tested, for the config that you've specified, or the default from the location you're in, on the day it's on, with the phase of the moon being what it is at the moment, with the number of days from payday, the temperature of the ocean. These are all things that affect speed. It doesn't make sense. And then you're faster than 91% of tested sites, except that's relative to other people who've used this tool in the last 30 days, most of which, A, are just testing their homepage, which probably isn't representative of their overall site speed, and B, are the kinds of people who are thinking about testing their site speed. So it's not a reasonably useful measure. And then the two things it does give you, which are really useful, is how big is your page and how many things did you load? And shock horror, you can make your site faster by loading fewer things and loading more things. None of that is rocket science. If you are using Google Analytics to measure your site speed, and your CMO and your stakeholders say, why is my site slow? And they show you Google Analytics data, I implore you just to kill them, or to leave, or to hunt down their families, or do something extreme, because data is useless. Google Analytics out the box, its speed data is based on sampling one in only every 100 of your site visitors. So if you get one visitor from a country far away from your server, running on an old iPhone, with a low network latency, all of your averages and your aggregated scaled data becomes absolute nonsense. It's very, very easy for that to get used. So it's not a really helpful source of truth. This is Google, and it'll become apparent why I'm ripping these apart in just a minute. This is Google PageSpeed Insights tool, which used to be really awful and is now not too bad, but it's a little bit full of nonsense. So it says your optimization is good, 83 out of 100. That means nothing. It suffers from all the same problems as the other tools that it's looking at versus other people who test. In fact, this one in particular doesn't actually measure your site. And this is the one that everybody cites. It's the tool that everybody uses to measure and analyze their performance. What it actually does is just look for evidence that you might have used certain techniques and then scores you accordingly. It doesn't actually measure your speed. There we go. So rule 2, which for some reason I duplicated into the beginning of the deck, is that the only thing that matters is the user's perception of speed, which is a bit amorphous. But when you look at Google's documentation, they have, in fact, throughout all this, I link to Google's documentation. It's so good. They've got some of the smartest people in the space writing guides and all of this. It's absolutely wonderful. So they say, and they understand that speed isn't just a single metric, and it's something complicated that you need to look across multiple different things. Really nice. However, there is one, in fact, there are two, but one's really interesting, one golden moment that's worth measuring for any site, for any system, whether it's WordPress or otherwise, and that's the time until first contentful paint. How many milliseconds does it take until there is something useful on the screen? And when you look at what that means, you're essentially saying, how long until we can show something interesting? How long until it looks like this is loading and working? I'll give you an example. This is a slightly old blog post on Yoast.com on our old design. It looks much nicer than this now. But when you start to look at this and think about it, how do I make this faster, and how do I make it appear faster? How do I get to that first contentful paint? The solution is to strip stuff we don't need. So we've got an interactive nav, a huge image, all these custom fonts, and then halfway down the screen where most people don't see initially, we've got a video that loads, we've got a comments form, we've got little pictures of all the authors and loads of JavaScript and CSS and sharing buttons. None of these are things that are needed for that initial second. So if you strip all of that out and you end up with, I want just a skeleton of the minimum viable stuff, and I will use things like conditional loading, people scroll, and I will defer certain bits of JavaScript. I'll come back to this in a bit, because this sort of stuff is really easy to do in WordPress in a way that it's typically really hard to do in other platforms. There are myriads of plugins and approaches that make this a 20-minute, 30-minute job to set up and test. And suddenly you can go from, I have these heavy pages that load all this stuff from my users, to I've deliberately and tactically only loaded the minimum stuff I need to show the content. And then the rest can load in the next few seconds. Get that very initial first contentful paint is really powerful. And whilst Google probably aren't measuring and ranking you on specific metrics, this is something that really makes it feel faster. Like all of that awkward tension you get as a user when you're swiping on your phone and it's chugging away and you don't know what it's doing or whether you're connected, all of that goes away because that initial connection is super fast. So all that. So there are 100 grown-up ways that can go out working towards all of this, and lots of hard work you can do, and 1,000 things you can change, and you can chip away at it until you die of old age. But being WordPress people, we have some shortcuts and we can cheat, which is nice. So measurement is important because you need to know where you start from. This is web page test. It's one of 2 or 3 decent speed tracking tools. Ignore the grades it gives you, like the A, B, C, D, E aren't useful. What's really useful is the waterfall chart it gives you in the middle here. And you can see item by item, if I skip forwards. This is a help to a different one. This is Pingdom's web page speed test, but it's the same principle. You can see all the things that are loading on your site. And you can see what was the size of those, how long did they take. One of the really nice things you can do, which you can see that I've done here, is filter, sort it by load time. And then I can see, okay, second row is really interesting. There's this JavaScript file loading that's only 4 kilobytes, but it takes forever. Like, that's really odd. That's a file that I've optimized, that our developers have worked on. It's tiny, but it's taking nearly half a second to execute. What's really interesting is you can see that it's bottlenecking this thing. And this really is the absolute #1 secret to optimizing your speed. Whatever system you're on, whatever you're doing, is to use tools like this to spot areas where things are dependent on other things, because bandwidth is fast, the internet is fast, people's connections are fast, people's phones are fast. What slows stuff down is poor queue management. When thing 1 has to wait for thing 2, that has to wait for thing 3, and they've all got to load one at a time because of the way they're coded or the way they work. Spotting things like this is really powerful. So I sat down with a developer for the best part of a day. We refactored that, got the developer rewrite it. This was well out of my comfort zone. I just pointed to him at this and said, we've got a problem, and we sat down and went through it together. We did that, and then suddenly our site is loading in almost half a second, because now that bottleneck, and if you look at this, you can imagine you remove that bottleneck, and suddenly both of those Google Publisher lines move back 2/3 of a second, and everything is super, super fast. So this sort of stuff's really powerful. You can see in the background here, the tool I'm using is Google and Developer Console, which if you are a Windows user, you can just hit F12 on your keyboard and go to the network tab. It's the same kind of thing as this, really powerful. Okay, so benchmarking. Here are the rules, and here's the framework that you need to think by. This is, again, from Google. It's really worth looking at. The principle is that you have 1 second to display your website, which feels pretty aspirational. It's definitely achievable. You have 300 milliseconds, which is limited and constrained by the internet and the speed of light. There's not a huge amount that you can do to speed up that initial connection from the device, the person clicking the link, the phone making the connection, the person typing something and hitting enter. That's hardwired constraints into the way the thing works. The rest of it, however, you have all of your hosting, your servers, your content delivery networks, which we'll come on to, your WordPress setup, your themes and your plugins, and then your front end, your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript. You can optimize these areas. And in the WordPress ecosystem especially, there are tools and tricks used to shave stuff off this. So you can quite happily get to a place where pretty much any site in the world can load in under 1 second if it's tactical about optimizing those bits, about not needing to load everything initially, managing the offload. So here are the shortcuts, some quick wins, if you will, pun intended. This is the secret, and anybody working on a WordPress site who hasn't done these things might want to do them all pretty much immediately. None of these are big or complex, technically or otherwise. You don't need huge amounts of dev resources. These are shortcuts you can use to get towards that 1 second barrier. So the easiest thing you can do is offload some of your ad by bolting on a content delivery network. Many of you will be familiar with these. I think there are many options in the market. Cloudflare is far and away the most interesting, the cheapest, the most powerful, and the most sophisticated when it comes to the intersect of SEO and speed. What is it? It sits in front of your website. So conventionally, you buy a domain and you build a website and you point that domain at the website. What you do in a Cloudflare world is you point the domain at Cloudflare, and then Cloudflare does a whole bunch of clever stuff and then passes that traffic onto your site. So the most basic version is it caches things. So when somebody tries to load an image on your website, rather than it going back and forth to your server, it grabs it from somewhere local to where the user is from Cloudflare system. But it also does a whole bunch of other stuff. It automatically compresses your images and changes their format to the most optimal format. It enables HTTP2, which makes your stuff stream much faster. It has a whole lot of security stuff. It does 1,000 things that you could do if you had the time and patience, but it does it all out the box. Their free version will give you almost everything that most people need. And if you really want to splash out, their $20 a month package gives you a whole bunch of extra toys. It's very rare for anyone to need to go up to the business level. This is a no-brainer. It makes your whole site, your image, your JavaScript, your CSS, or much faster. Not every people see a visit. Again, it has all these nice things where you literally just go in and you tick the boxes. It has information you can read, and you do things like, yes, make my images faster, tick, done. This is super easy. After you.
Oh, I was just going to say, just for everyone at home, if you want to, it basically, a CDN just brings your site physically closer to your visitors.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's basically what it's doing. So if you've got a hosting provider that has a server, say in America, and your visitors are from Australia, you know, there might be some latency results that result in some poor performance. By adding a CDN, you can really serve your site from a location that are closer to your visitors, and therefore really dramatically speeding up the loading times.
Yeah, and again, the one of the biggest bottlenecks there is the speed of light. Like if you want to connect from the very eastern coast of America to the very western coast of America, that is going to take 600 milliseconds. And there is nothing you can do to reduce that, because that's how long it takes for the request to go there and back. So if your content is traversing large areas of land or sea, all you can do is move your server, and of course that's incredibly hard and complicated.
Yeah.
Losing you there a bit.
Yeah. I was wondering.
Sorry, Jono, could you just Jono, could you just can you hear Nik, or is he fading out?
Yeah, he's fading out, unfortunately.
If you just search.
Yeah. You've just faded out, Jono. Can you hear us? No, I think we might have to we may have to go to a couple of these questions. Maybe I'll throw some questions at you, Nik, actually, while we're waiting for Jono to see if we can get connection improved.
Sure.
So actually one of the questions here was a question here which said about I'll just read it out. It's from Miguel Palmar.
Mm-hmm.
When you mention load times, what is the assumed download speed of the visitor? Google Tools seems to standardize around 3G mobile, but please clarify your assumptions.
Yeah, I think what Jono said earlier, which Google Analytics looks at one in every visitors to sort of measure the speed depending on the device that they're using to be able to view your website. I think that's very much where oh, Peter, turn your camera on.
Yes.
Yeah, technical difficulties. What webinar would be without it? I think that's really interesting, because that's really looking at the people that are actually using your site. So largely, as a blanket rule, for every single different website, for every single site page, there are different measures that we sort of use to try and best serve our users. So it really is dependent on you. So this is what this is why we're having this conversation, because what ultimately we're really trying to do is unpack the context. Why it's important. Go through the theory. What does everything mean? Because to measure speed, there is no one metric that you look at. There are so many different things that sort of bring about this optimization of user experience. So, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to go through the logic. So when you are looking at your site, when you are trying to do it for yourself, that you'll have this logic that is really just arming you to best optimize what you're looking at.
Thanks for doing that. Yeah, thanks for answering that, because we obviously we lost you, Jono, and we just went to some of the questions. We just thought we'd answer a couple of questions there in the meantime. So it was getting really exciting, and then all of a sudden you just fell off the. You went too close to the edge. We went off the edge right there.
Chris, yep. Right. Should we do a couple more questions?
I think we got to. I think we got to the point where you were talking about. We just got past the bit about the Cloudflare and the CDN and HTTP2, some things like that.
Talk about hosting, I guess.
Hosting, I would love you to talk about hosting. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite things. So important, and it's one of the biggest recommendations I give. So I'd love to hear what you got to say, Jono.
Oh God, yeah, it's critical. If you only do one thing off the back of this, is at least evaluate your hosting. So WordPress is an interesting machine, and the way I like to think about it and talk about it is like this. It is a series of incredibly complicated conveyor belts running in an enormous factory. And this is its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. And the way WordPress works is you say, I type in a URL or I click a link, and that's what I want. And then the whole system wakes up, the factory starts moving, it manufactures the thing you want, it drops the parcel on the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt starts moving through. What it then does is every plugin you have, all of your theme config, and all the weird bits of settings you have, pick those parcels up, move them to different lines, put them down, fill them with things, take things out, switch them around. This is what all your plugins do. They say, your system said, get me this page, but this plugin is designed to intercept that parcel, to evaluate the content, to change it, and then to put it back, and all it takes time. And the more things you have going, I'm not saying plugins are inherently slow, but the more processing you add to that process, the things that need to happen in between you saying get me this page and it being returned, the more complicated that factory becomes. Now there are two things that you can do to speed that factory up. One is you can be more sophisticated in how you manage the journey of those parcels. You can say, actually, I don't need this bit. I can do this with an existing process. You can remove plugins. You can consolidate logic. You can code your own solutions. You can understand how those conveyor belts work. Or you can cheat. You can get a faster conveyor belt. This is essentially the difference between bad hosting and good hosting. Good hosting is designed to optimize the flow through of that conveyor belt.
I love that analogy.
Good hosting. It's wonderful, isn't it? It just expands, and it's great. Like this is what your website looks like on the inside. So there's a whole bunch of different options in the hosting space, and these are by no means all of them. And this is definitely something you want to research and evaluate and make your own decision on. These are my very rough suggestions. They're all stuff I've used personally that I really endorse, and your mileage will vary. There are some hard and fast rules outside of this. So if you're paying less than, I don't know, $20 per month on your hosting, you definitely need to upgrade, because you are losing more in that, in site speed, in downtime, in quality. If your hosting company has an animal for a logo, you need to do some serious soul searching. That means you're probably with the wrong vendor. These guys are really good. Go and look at others. If you had to pick one of these out of the blue, ServBolt are incredible. They are not the cheapest, But they're what I use for my own site. It's not incredibly cheap, but they are so lightning fast, like orders of magnitude faster than everyone else. If you want to do your own stuff, DigitalOcean, Vultr are really good. If you'll have a play and do the research, but definitely talk to these vendors. Make sure it looks like they understand WordPress as a product. Otherwise, you're just getting generic hosting that won't understand it. These guys all really do understand WordPress. Chat if nothing else.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Yeah, no, not at all. Like truly believe live the dream.
Yeah.
Related to the factory analogy. So if your factory is just manufacturing and packing the same goods, and it's doing all this logic to check what's in the boxes and to change them, there's definitely an opportunity to say, you know what, if this process is just opening the box, looking what's inside, swapping it from a cat to an alligator, I don't know, it's doing the same logic over and over again just to output the same thing. Why can't you just save and skip those steps? So one of these plugins, make sure, like use either, again, do your own research, they come with different pros and cons. WP Rocket is incredibly simple and easy and hides all the complexity. It does cost, I can't remember how much, a fortune, I think it's about $90 a year. W3 Total Cache comes with 1 trillion options and checkboxes, which you will need a dissertation and days of your life to go through, but offers incredible control, and it's free. The principle behind most of what they do is simple, is if your site has to go through the same process every time anybody tries to load a page, why can't you just save the output of that process and give them that? You create a static HTML version of the final page of your product page or your home page or whatever it is. And then you just send users to that instead. And it works behind the scenes. And it means that all of that time your system would have spent going, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do all this processing, I'm going to run all my plugins, I'm going to evaluate the theme, I'm going to assess the URL, all goes away. And it just serves a static version. Does often require some configuration, can cause serious issues if you're doing anything weird with your theme or you're running non-standard plugins. But for most sites out the box, this plus Cloudflare will get you from 4 seconds to 1 second with about an hour's work. It's pretty incredible.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's insane. And there are plenty of other players in this space, but these guys are really at the cutting edge and they're doing some really shiny stuff. I think WP Rocket just added some automated lazy loading stuff for images. So if you're running it, it will also, I was talking about it briefly earlier, there's no point loading images that aren't visible yet. It will detect that and do it for you, which is really, really cool.
That's nice.
Yeah, worth spending a bit of money on, I think. Your resources are probably your next biggest bottleneck. So all of the stuff we've talked about so far is about the back end. It's about the systems. It's about that workflow and the processes and the conveyor belts, the process of getting the server to respond and to ship the response to the visitor. What happens then is a very different process where your browser says, okay, this website says, here is my HTML code, here is my CSS, here is my JavaScript, and here are 20 images I need to load. And then your browser just panics and screams and throws everything out the window and takes 20 seconds to download it all. So even if you ship the stuff quickly, you still need to manage the logic and the attributes of the things you've shipped in a way that makes them download quickly. The very basic fundamentals of that, at least in terms of images, are smaller images are better, which is not rocket science. Cloudflare will do some of the heavy lifting for you, but you definitely also want one of these. I know many others in the market, again, and do your own research, but these two I found to be incredibly good. Smush, I think both of these are free, but have premium options. Actually, one I haven't mentioned that's also really good is TinyPNG, which has a panda for a logo, which definitely plays in its favor. That has a plugin that's really good. One of those three. These guys, when you upload your image, just strip out a load of crap and make it much smaller, which means regardless of anything else you do, you are sending fewer kilobytes to your user, which is handy.
Smush has been around a long time as well, hasn't it? Like,
yeah,
it's one of the first ones I started using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use that here too. Sorry, WP Smush.
That's the one. Yeah, they're really nice. They get much better compression rates than a lot of the other guys, but I think it's a bit slow to post. So like, there's trade-offs on all of them, but have a play. If you want to get really intense, this is, I mentioned this earlier, this is the Google Chrome console. I've got the network tab open, and I'm looking at the JavaScript and the CSS files that this page is loading. And there's some really useful stuff here. Like you can see the size in kilobytes. So there's some quite big ones there. There's like a 28 kilobyte file there loading a load of fonts that we probably don't use. And you can see the loading times on the right. What's really interesting is this coverage report at the bottom. So you can see that We are the second row in that coverage report. We are loading yoast.com, blah, 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 style.min.css. We are not using 89.2% of that file. That's a big old piece of CSS that is designed to have code that's used across the whole site. It's like it's the header, it's the footer, it's the fonts, it's the typography, but we're only using 10% of it on the homepage. If we split that file up and we talk to our developers and we say, you know what, can we structure our CSS in a way that it makes sense to use only the bits we need on each page to be much more efficient, we now only load 10% of that code. Now, what's really interesting is there are many plugins that can do this somewhat automatically. The two interesting ones are WP Rocket, which I've mentioned, and WP Auto Optimize. It's like Auto Optimize, but it's missing an O in there somewhere. That's really cool. And you can configure that in such a way that it scans your site and it tries to split out and show. You'll need to micromanage this and pay some attention, but some of the biggest wins you can have are speeding up that front end. Even if your hosting is slow and your systems are slow, if you can ship the JavaScript and CSS and the stuff to the user more quickly, you'll be faster overall.
If I can just add one thing there, I need to have a bit of a caveat to this because I'm not a developer, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably not developers. Hence why they're, trying to ask some more technical questions around this. This is kind of what I use to sort of see whether or not for each line of script, what that actually means. Because from an immediacy, I see, .js, .css, .html. I know their functionality, but I don't actually understand as to, how important is this script? What is it actually doing? And of course, how much of it is actually being used. So being able to drill down to this deep of a level without being a developer is a fantastic way to actually inform developers, hey, this particular line needs to be minified or something like that, because I can actually see how much of that is being used and how much of that is being basically wasting my time.
Absolutely. This is all diagnosis, right? You're not expected to, and you're not going to be able to fix stuff from this, but I can definitely see halfway down that main list, style.min.css has a huge green and blue bar. It's taking 700 milliseconds almost. It's 25K. That is a bottleneck. And if I can see that, I can start a conversation with my developer, the person who runs my site. I can say, can we explore and understand whether this is a server issue, whether it's a coverage issue, and you can start to get to the bottom of that.
Absolutely. Love that waterfall.
So I have a whole... the waterfall's the thing. Like, this is a visual representation of where the bottlenecks and dependencies are. It's the best way you have for understanding what is holding what else up. And even if you unpick those bits which are slow, it's going to make a huge difference. So I've got two other things I wanted to run through briefly. One I'll come out the presentation for briefly in a minute. I've got some other plugin recommendations. But the other one is, if all of this sounds scary and complex and you want a magic button, there is one, but it's politically contentious.
Ooh.
I'm sure many of you have heard.
Why don't you put that on the screen? Gee.
I'm a big fan of AMP. If you're not familiar with AMP, it is, what is it? What is AMP? AMP is a JavaScript framework from a technical perspective. From a political perspective, it is a new standard for HTML, which is very heavily influenced by Google and other players and increasingly democratized, but very much born under the wings of Google with the intent that the mobile web is slow, HTML is bad, people build bad websites. The AMP standard is designed to enforce good behavior and the building of good, very, very fast websites by constraining the toolkits. It's a set of Lego. It's a very simplistic set of Lego. And you can't run your own custom JavaScript. You'll lose some tracking capabilities. You might lose some nice swishy interaction capabilities, but your site will be lightning fast. And many of the challenges of AMP are writing the code and managing the different versions of your pages, etc. The AMP plugin, and there are a few, make sure you look at this one. It's heavily invested in by Google and WordPress VIP and other people, can automatically convert your whole site to AMP. And in most cases, maintain the look and feel and functionality. And where it can't, it will tell you exactly what the issues are with exactly which plugins, with exactly which scripts, and then you can go have those conversations with your developers. What that means is that literally at the click of a button, you can ignore this whole talk. It will make it make all of your CSS lazy load. It will make all of your images lazy load. It will make everything manage above the fold. It will make everything load instantly. It will manage all your customizations. It's incredibly powerful and only getting better. I know a whole bunch of the guys who are involved in the AMP code and the spec, and they are very bought into WordPress. They're very bought into speed. You've still got to overcome this political challenge that you've got to decide if you are comfortable or not betting on Google's version of what the internet should be. Like, sure, this is cool kit and it's really powerful, but if it gains traction across the whole web and the whole world, we've kind of accidentally put Google in charge of what the internet is and what it's made of, which isn't necessarily good if we are interested in pursuing the open web and open standards, etc. So there's some interesting political decisions. However, if you want a shortcut and you want a magic bullet, this is definitely one. It's also worth noting that as Google gets increasingly involved in WordPress as an ecosystem, which is something that's happening, they're very invested in pushing WordPress itself forwards. This AMP plugin in particular, and AMP in general, is where they will spearhead new features. So if you want shiny new toys a year before your non-WordPress competitors, you will need to be running this plugin on your WordPress site to get access. And they're already launching very, very shiny new things. It's worth having a look at. But yeah, make sure you're comfortable with kind of handing over the keys to the kingdom. So, is there anything else I should cover on AMP? I'm aware that this is some people.
I love the way you approached it from a political point of view, because it really, I mean, it's political, and there's that thing about you giving your content to someone else. You no longer have it.
Yep.
And but we could talk about AMP all day. Let's keep going, John. The resources, these look really good.
Can I just have maybe just one thing I'd like to say? Sorry, I have so many opinions.
Yeah, Nik, what's up?
I think if you're wanting to put AMP on your websites, maybe do it like on a small part of it. Maybe test it out with your blog section. Particularly, a lot of people always say, like, AMP's great for mobile first. And it's really, really great, particularly for, news and publications and things like that, because obviously, when we're wanting to look through and read news, we don't really care too much about being able to look around. We just want to be able to find that information extremely quickly and maybe bounce around a couple of clicks, but that's kind of it. So maybe just test out just a small part of your website and, see how it goes and see whether there is a marketable difference.
Dip your toe in the water, and before diving in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, test carefully for sure. And it may well break big parts of your website depending on how it's built. So you're going to want to test it anyway. Okay, some bits and pieces then. There's 2 bits. I don't know how are we for timing, because I wanted to. I had an idea as well.
Well, we do have some questions that are appearing in the chat, Jono, and I think by the time if we go through these resources quickly, then we can have a chat. I can ask some of these questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. So.
Okay, cool. Right, 10 seconds on that then. If you are absolutely new to speed and you want a version of this kind of thinking, but designed to help you get buy-in from your stakeholders and your managers and your CEOs, this deck by Emily Grossman, who's a good friend, is really good. It was delivered at Search Server and Moz. It's the same kind of stuff, but it's designed to help you tell those stories and get that buy-in. If you want to dip your toe in understanding some of the technology behind this and WebStar, go read everything by John Henshaw. Again, there's links on all of this. He's a good friend. He's really, really smart on very, very fast WordPress sites in particular. This is his area. He's an expert. He knows a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to get ahead of your competitors and you really want to know where all the technology is going and you want to roll your sleeves up a bit and do a bit of code, go read stuff by Bastian Grimm. He's one of the very few people that I nerd out with about where all this is going, and we think about all the implications of that together. It's really, really cool. He's very, very smart. So there is no magic bullet for this, but there is go and install Cloudflare if you don't already have it. No sponsorship, no endorsement. I just love them to bits, and it's so easy and it's so powerful. Go and read, if you search for Google's Web Fundamentals documentation, there's a link at the bottom, but you can't see the scale of it here, but if you look on that left navigation, that goes about 5 times that length, and it breaks out about 4 levels deep. This is everything you could ever possibly read about and learn about web speed and performance. It's not hugely WordPress specific, but for anything you find in there, you can absolutely find plugins that solve those problems. I think really, really straightforward. More broadly, read everything that Ilya Grigorik has ever written. This is, he's phenomenal. He wrote most of Google's documentation and set the best practice and standards on how all of this works. He's increasingly involved in the WordPress ecosystem. I've spent time with him at WordCamp conferences and we've discussed stuff. I'm working with him at the moment passively on defining a specification for how fonts should load in WordPress based on his work. He is really, really cool. This is the guy who is shaping the future of performance on the whole web, and WordPress is his current playground. And he's really keen to chat, and he's very accessible, and well worth keeping an eye on him. And then finally, yeah, go take a look at AMP. We mentioned that, and decide politically, etc., etc. I think that's the end of that deck. Yes, it is. Cool. Done. Finished. Success.
Wow. Yeah, so much information there. So we can have a copy of that deck, Jono?
Yes, I will ship something over at the end of this. Absolutely.
So, so all our viewers can read through that again and get all the notes. And yeah, look, I think you could study that for quite a while and really just drill into that. That could be the basis of the work you were doing, optimizing your site, and to keep you busy for a while.
Oh God, it would. The other thing I've just got on my screen very quickly in 10 seconds or less was so my site, I got an off-the-shelf theme and off-the-shelf hosting. I challenged myself to try and speed up using, like, in the same situation that most people would find themselves in, where they don't control the code or they're not comfortable editing it. This selection of plugins and setup has got me down to 0.6 seconds. So I'm on ServeBolt hosting. I'm running Cloudflare, and these are the plugins I use for speed. I'll include these in the deck afterwards, but it's worth sharing just quickly. I use A3 Lazy Load. I don't use AMP, not yet, because I'm not quite ready, because I use some custom JavaScript. Auto Optimize, Cloudflare, some Cloudflare add-ons. This is Tiny PNG's image compression system. I think there's another few. I self-host my fonts so that I'm not making a cross-domain resource request. ServeBolt have a thing. I use this to split out my page-specific CSS. So if I want to add some custom styling, and I only want to use that on, say, my contact page, I can use this to only add that conditionally. And that's it for speed. I'll add those to the deck, but it was worth just flagging some of these. Like A3 Lazy Load was really nice, for example. Cool. All right, I will. That's
a great. Yeah, no, that's a great insight for us. Thanks for showing us. Yeah, the inside of your website.
Yeah, the mess.
Yeah. How does Jono? Ooh, I'm going to take a screenshot of that.
What did I give away?
Yeah. So look, we've got some questions from our audience. So I'll just go through, and we can just keep them brief. But one of them here was actually, I just saw you had the Cloudflare plugin. One of the questions here is, doesn't additional plugins like Cloudflare slow down your site?
It can do if they're badly coded, or if they're doing very, very complicated, large-scale things. It's not that plugins inherently are slow. It's that adding things that do more things are slow, and if they're low quality, then they do those badly, and that's slower. I think in particular, if we're talking about plugins that speed things up, typically they're going to add more speed even if they detract from it. Like the WP Rocket has some very complex processing, and that takes some number of milliseconds, but you save hundreds of milliseconds in the stuff that it optimizes. So in some cases, yes, but not if you're managing it well.
And the good ones are better. Here's a good one for both of you, Jono and Nik. So Mike O'Halloran, I hope I pronounced that right, Mike O'Halloran. Any WordPress themes you recommend for speed?
Oh,
any preferred themes?
So personal, aren't they? That's like, So I don't have any recommendations on specific themes, but theme frameworks. Genesis is quite cool. There's a lot of work on that recently. If you want to be really cutting edge, the next generation are all going to use WP Rig. It's being built by a whole bunch of people from Google and other areas and collaborating. It's designed to be kind of like what WordPress should have been if we designed it from scratch now. It's really, really cool. It's a bit hardcore.
Genesis seems to be a staple. It's been around a long time, and they've really improved it a lot recently. Nik, do you have a preferred theme for speed?
I'm trying to actually think of a couple of themes off the top of my head. We make custom sites here, so we kind of build them from scratch as per basically what the client wants. So I'm really actually struggling to think of something that's out of the box to answer your question. Sorry.
That's a great answer to the question, I think. What about another one here? We have John Macros. There's a theme appearing here. John Macros and also Gina. So this question here is: what about tools like Beaver Builder? Are they slowing down the site? Someone else says Eliminator. They're using Eliminator and it's killing at page speed.
Yeah. So page builders and that kind of technology are always going to be slow in two ways, relatively speaking. They're going to be slow on the back end and slow the whole system down because they add a huge amount of capabilities and overhead to things like the post editing process. And then because they add a lot of fluidity, one of the trade-offs of that is they don't always output the most efficient code on the front end. So they're always going to be a bit slow. However, what will change in the relatively near future is all of these systems should be starting to migrate to use the Gutenberg API. They are just essentially outputting blocks in the same way that Gutenberg's content system outputs blocks. That will be the central mechanism they all use. And then all they become essentially is user interface tools rather than actual page builders. So I think even if they're a bit slow at the moment, they should start getting much faster as they adopt new technologies.
The Gutenberg stuff, that's obviously we haven't talked about that yet. It's another maybe
it's an AMP, isn't it?
Open a can of worms and get into the whole thing. It's a massive big change, isn't it? It's so fundamental to the way that WordPress works. So so let's go. Actually, I'll go on to the next question here. It's from Boo Sunscreen. So the question here is, in terms of speed, I know this is getting off topic and maybe it'll be a quick answer. What about the advantage of WordPress over Shopify?
Yeah.
Okay. Nik, do you also give a blah as well?
Well, okay, maybe a little bit more words around the blah. Look, like one of the advantages of WordPress is that it is open source. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be contributing and offering a lot of customizations and support. But the thing with Shopify and Squarespace and largely like a lot of out-of-the-box web builders is that your theme files and your cPanel are largely not really being able to be amended too much. And of course, when we can't really amend those things, we're going to have basically a benchmark that we won't really be able to surpass all that much. And in an increasingly competitive industry, depending on what your site is and what you're wanting to do with that, these are the ways in which we try and surpass our competitors, which is really important, I think, to a lot of people that are listening.
I mean, if you've been playing around making some cane baskets at home and you want to start selling them online on the weekend and maybe down the market, go right ahead, get onto Shopify.
You want to dominate the cane basket.
Selling it.
You've got to arm yourself with the best.
Yeah,
but if you
version of that answer is that it's about control, right? You don't want to be constrained by some third party's limitations, and you're gambling on them employing a team who understand all the best practices and maintain that. And the model doesn't necessarily mean it's in their best interest to give it to everybody. Yeah, it all gets a bit messy.
So go onto WordPress, speed it up. I mean, I'm a WordPress advocate all the way. And so here's another question. What about this one's from Lake Air. Any thoughts using Uber Menu? Is it slow? Did it slow it down? Uber Menu. I don't. Maybe we'll defer that question until later. Nik, have you used Uber Menu? We sort of use it, but I mean,
I think largely there is a common theme to a lot of these questions, and they're asking very specific questions around additional things that they add to WordPress, because people are wanting to find something easy, and they don't actually know whether or not they're going to implement something that is going to essentially damage their site. So maybe like the better question to ask here is, when you are looking at third-party tools to assess your site, how do you tell which is a theme file, and how do you sort of measure whether something is good? I'd actually really be interested to hear Jono's thoughts on that, because it's something that we deal with a lot with clients who come on board. I'm like, you might need a new site, but there are so many things that I can sort of like bombard you with to tell you why. But
yeah. Yeah, because you're talking about, I mean, often you hear recommendations like, oh, you need to build a new site. But I hear people saying that all the time. But I mean, yeah, first of all, Jono, can we work on the speed? I mean, I've seen lots of really ugly looking websites that outrank, your big competitors. So
yeah, so if you want to, so I shared a few tools you can use to kind of monitor from the outside in. The one I didn't mention, two things I didn't mention. One is have a look at Google's Lighthouse tool. It's a Chrome extension, really, really sophisticated speed measurement. Yeah, and it's really, really cool. And it gives you a whole bunch of breakdowns of this CSS file slow, this image is too big, really awesome. If you want to do something a bit more WordPressy and really roll your sleeves up, I would use a plugin called Query Monitor. It adds a little overview to the bottom of all your pages that only you can see if you're logged in as an admin, that like gets a bit hardcore and into the depth, but you can see this MySQL 4 seconds, there's a problem with it, and it's instantiated by this plugin name. And then you can start to go, okay, this page is slow because this plugin is taking forever and it's generating 1,000 database queries or forever to load the page. And it will highlight those, like there's realms and realms of data and depth, but it will highlight the slow stuff very easily.
Yeah, so you can actually in real time be able to see if you are implementing, a new bit of like a new menu or a new theme or a new plugin. What kind of how do you assess whether that's going to be working for you? That's a really nice, easy, quick way of assessing that.
With the Lighthouse, just going back to that again, of course. The Google Page Speed tool is now using the Lighthouse, the framework, and which I mean, it's quite a big change. But I mean, I would also say that you get into Lighthouse because you can, it's on your browser. You can browse pages and you can just analyze things while you're going about browsing the site. Run the Lighthouse and dig in. Any takeaways, Nik? What's your big takeaway for everyone? We've got only got about 3 minutes left. So, what's your big takeaway?
I think having third-party tools to assess whether or not additional elements that you're adding to your website is or is not affecting site speed, and finding all the way down to the bit of script that is affecting it is kind of largely the way to go. I would, if I was prioritizing it, I would look first at maybe homepage, because most people go to the homepage first, and then I would maybe look at going through service page, your primary landing pages, landing pages that you're wanting people to convert on, and then sort of like assessing it from there. So rule of importance: homepage, your core landing pages, and then looking like at your entire website, and maybe using another tool which we haven't mentioned, Screaming Frog. They've got like an arbitrary like server load speeds, the page load speed, and a couple other different measures, and you can sort of see which are the highest offenders on your site that is kind of dragging the whole thing largely down, as well as being able to see how one.
Screaming Frog, I'm a fan of that, and it does help you drill into your speed issues. That's for sure. So what's your are you on Twitter? How do people connect with you? How do people follow up if they want to ask you any more questions?
Yeah, you can find me at webfirm.com, or you can find me at LinkedIn at Nik Ranger. I'm on Twitter at datahono.com, datahono, because that's my band name. And I haven't really migrated to like a personal tagline. So any way you can find me, just pop me a question, and largely I'm on using those platforms to say hello.
And thank you so much for all of your contribution today. And I'll just, yeah, that's not a problem. And it's always very valuable, the information you share. So, Jono, do you have any, I guess, sort of like takeaway for our audience, just to go ahead and that they can just do straight away? Actionable, what can they do straight away?
Everything that Nik said and more, like nail on the head. I think two things. One is don't get sucked into believing and reporting on the very simplistic numbers that the tool gives you. Like if they say that you score 73, it doesn't mean anything. It's so averaged and generic. Go in and do what Nik was talking about. Look at the individual scripts, open up Query Monitor or Screaming Frog or any of these tools, and actually go and look and understand, to take the effort to understand what's loading in what order, what's holding what up. It's a little bit complicated to get into it initially, but all you're looking at is sequences of things, and you can spot the issues really quickly, even if you can't necessarily resolve them. The easy win, Cloudflare or AMP, and if you're feeling really risky, then potentially both of them at once, depending on your appetite. But definitely Cloudflare if you're not already, and or other CDNs exist. Yada yada. Use Cloudflare. Like, don't even bother looking at the others. Easy wins.
Yeah, I'd my little takeaway, I'll just throw that in as well, would be absolutely just if you're not using Cloudflare, get onto it and use it. And if you're not using something, I mean, I love WP Engine. It's so easy for people to migrate onto, and it's just a very, I just think you put Cloudflare, WP Engine together, and then do some smushing. So there's my little takeaway. and I think you can. So Jono, thank you so much. Where can people connect with you? What's your best channel for people to follow you on and ask you further questions or be involved?
Twitter's good, at Jono Alderson. Also jonoalderson.com. I'm speaking at all sorts of conferences and things. There's a big list on there somewhere. Yoast.com, LinkedIn, Facebook occasionally. Wherever. I'm online, always online. Occasionally I'm asleep, but not often.
Yeah. So all around the world, thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much.
And the questions, they were great questions. And we'll certainly keep this conversation going. And just one more thank you, Nik. And again, Jono, thank you so much. Thanks to Semrush for allowing us to host this and get this knowledge out there. And we'll keep the community going until next time. We'll say sayonara, goodbye, and talk to you later.
Adios. Bye, guys.
Thank you.